Everything at my best friend's baby shower felt flawless, until my husband quietly leaned in and said, "We need to leave. Right now." I was completely shocked. "What's happening? Why the rush?" He stayed silent until we were in the car. Finally, he turned to me asking, "You honestly didn't notice, did you?" His next words sent a wave of dread through me. The celebration was in full swing when I noticed Donald had gone completely still. He stood frozen near the refreshment table, his physician's eyes fixed on Lauren with the kind of focused attention he usually reserved for examining patients. Something about his posture sent a chill down my spine, even as the warm afternoon sun streamed through the windows and guests laughed around us. When he finally moved, it was to reach for my hand with a grip that told me everything had just changed, though I didn't yet understand why. I had arrived at Lauren's baby shower 2 hours earlier with genuine excitement, carrying carefully wrapped gifts and a heart full of joy for my dearest friend. The house had been transformed into something extraordinary. Lavender ribbons adorned every surface, delicate paper lanterns swayed gently from the ceiling, and elegant floral arrangements created an atmosphere of refined celebration. Lauren had always possessed an eye for detail, but this level of perfection exceeded even her usual standards. The guest list represented a carefully curated selection of Lauren's social and professional circles. Women from her position at the hospital mingled with neighbors, charity board members, and families I recognized from various community events. Each person seemed genuinely pleased to participate in celebrating Lauren's journey toward motherhood, their faces bright with the particular joy that accompanies welcoming new life into the world. Before we continue, I want to thank you for joining me in sharing these stories about trust and betrayal. If you believe that truth matters more than misplaced loyalty, please consider subscribing. It helps us reach more people who need to hear this. Now let's see what Michelle discovers next. Lauren moved through the gathering with remarkable grace, one hand resting protectively over the gentle curve of her belly while she accepted congratulations and well wishes from each guest. Her radiance appeared authentic and natural, the kind of glow that people associate with expectant mothers in their second trimester. She spoke with enthusiasm about the nursery preparations, her prenatal appointments, and the excitement she and her husband Alaric shared about becoming parents. The gift opening ceremony had drawn everyone into the living room, where Lauren positioned herself in an antique armchair that had belonged to her grandmother. The packages surrounding her created a colorful display of anticipation, each one wrapped with care and chosen with thought. Traditional baby gifts appeared alongside more practical offerings: clothing sets in neutral colors, soft blankets, educational toys, and various items that new parents require. However, the monetary donations proved most remarkable. Family after family approached Lauren with sealed envelopes, explaining their preference to contribute to her charitable foundation rather than purchase conventional gifts. New Beginnings, as Lauren had named her organization, focused on supporting families who had experienced pregnancy loss or infant mortality. The concept resonated deeply with many attendees, particularly those who had endured similar tragedies in their own lives. The Henderson family shared their story of losing their 3-month-old son to sudden infant death syndrome. Mrs. Martinez spoke quietly about multiple miscarriages that had preceded the successful birth of her now teenage daughter. An elderly woman named Mrs. Chin described the stillbirth of her only child 20 years earlier, tears gathering in her eyes as she pressed her donation into Lauren's hands. Lauren received each story with profound compassion, her own eyes filling with tears as she listened to these accounts of loss and resilience. She spoke eloquently about how the foundation would utilize their contributions to provide support groups, professional counseling services, and financial assistance to families navigating similar experiences. Her passion for the cause appeared genuine and deeply personal, which only enhanced the emotional impact of these exchanges. Throughout the afternoon, I observed my husband with growing concern. Donald rarely enjoyed large social gatherings, preferring the structured environment of his medical practice to the unpredictable dynamics of parties. I had persuaded him to attend by emphasizing the importance of supporting Lauren during this significant milestone, but his discomfort seemed more pronounced than usual. He had positioned himself near the back of the room during most activities, his arms crossed and his expression increasingly troubled. When I caught his attention and offered an encouraging smile, he managed only a brief nod in response. His usual composure appeared strained, as though he were wrestling with some internal conflict that I could not identify. The monetary contributions accumulated throughout the afternoon, eventually totaling several $1,000s according to Lauren's careful tallying. Each donation represented not merely financial support but also an act of faith from families who trusted Lauren to honor their losses by helping others in similar circumstances. I felt privileged to witness such generosity and grateful that my friend had found a meaningful way to channel her own journey toward motherhood into service for others. Lauren's husband Alaric maintained his position close to her side throughout the celebration, embodying the role of devoted father-to-be with obvious pride. He assisted her in managing the gifts, engaged warmly with guests, and demonstrated the kind of protective attentiveness that expectant fathers typically develop. Their partnership appeared solid and mutually supportive, exactly what one would hope to see from a couple preparing to welcome their first child. As the party began to conclude and guests started collecting their belongings, I helped Lauren organize the gifts and secure the donation envelopes. The afternoon had exceeded all expectations in terms of attendance, generosity, and emotional resonance. Lauren expressed her gratitude repeatedly, emphasizing how overwhelmed she felt by the outpouring of support from family and friends. It was during these final moments of the celebration that Donald's behavior shifted dramatically. I discovered him standing by our car in the driveway, his keys already in hand and his face drained of color. The transformation from his earlier discomfort to this level of obvious distress alarmed me immediately. "Donald, what are you doing out here?" I asked, approaching him with growing apprehension. He looked at me with an expression I had never witnessed before, combining deep concern with something darker that I could not immediately interpret. His medical training had taught him to remain calm under pressure, but whatever he had observed inside the house had clearly shaken his professional composure. "We need to leave," he stated quietly, his voice carrying an urgency that made my stomach tighten with dread. "Right now." The finality in his tone suggested that this was not a request but a necessity, though I remained completely unable to understand what could have prompted such an extreme reaction to what had seemed like a perfectly lovely afternoon celebrating my dearest friend. The drive home stretched endlessly, filled with my desperate questions and Donald's stubborn silence. His knuckles remained white against the steering wheel, and every attempt I made to understand his urgency was met with the same response. "Not here. Not yet." The familiar streets of our neighborhood felt foreign under the weight of his obvious distress, and by the time we pulled into our driveway, my anxiety had transformed into something approaching panic. Donald disappeared into his home office immediately upon entering the house, leaving me standing in our foyer with my purse still clutched in my hands and my mind racing through every possible explanation for his behavior. I could hear him moving papers around, opening file cabinets and speaking in low tones on the telephone. Whatever had triggered his reaction at the baby shower clearly required immediate professional attention. When he finally emerged an hour later, he carried a manila folder that he placed carefully on our kitchen table. His expression had shifted from urgency to something more complex, a mixture of professional certainty and personal regret that I had never seen before. He pulled out a chair for me, then seated himself across the table with the deliberate movements of someone about to deliver life-changing news. "Michelle, I need you to look at something," he said, opening the folder to reveal several sheets of medical documentation. "These are Lauren's blood test results from last week. I accessed them through the hospital system after what I observed today." The papers meant nothing to me initially. Numbers, abbreviations, and medical terminology filled the forms in neat, clinical rows. But Donald began explaining each line item with the patience of a physician educating a patient about a serious diagnosis. The HCG levels, the hormone markers, the comprehensive metabolic panel. Each result painted a picture that contradicted everything Lauren had claimed about her pregnancy. "These numbers don't lie," Donald continued, pointing to specific values highlighted in yellow. "A woman in her second trimester would show completely different results. Lauren's blood work indicates she has never been pregnant, not recently and possibly not ever." The clinical evidence stared back at me in black and white, forcing me to confront a reality that my heart refused to accept. My hands trembled as I studied each page, my layperson's understanding gradually grasping the significance of numbers that exposed the elaborate fraud my best friend had constructed. The medical documentation felt like a death certificate for our friendship, officially declaring the end of something I had believed was genuine and precious. As the implications settled into my consciousness, I found myself mentally replaying every moment from the baby shower with this new, devastating perspective. Lauren's careful hand placement on her stomach suddenly appeared calculated rather than protective. The way she had avoided helping move heavy chairs or reaching for items on high shelves now seemed like theatrical performance rather than maternal caution. Her responses to well-wishers' questions about morning sickness, cravings, and prenatal appointments took on an entirely different character when viewed through the lens of deception. Each answer had been delivered with just the right amount of detail to seem authentic without providing information that could be easily verified. Lauren had crafted her performance with the skill of a professional actress, and I had been her most devoted audience member. The painful realization of how expertly I had been manipulated cut deeper than the initial shock of discovery. Lauren had used our intimate friendship, built over decades of shared experiences and mutual trust, to make her lies more believable and emotionally devastating. She knew exactly which emotional buttons to press, which shared memories to reference, and which vulnerabilities to exploit in order to maintain my unwavering support. "How long have you suspected something was wrong?" I asked Donald, though part of me dreaded hearing the answer. He leaned back in his chair, running his hands through his hair in a gesture of exhaustion. "Honestly, I've been concerned about Lauren's behavior patterns for years. Today just confirmed what I had been observing but couldn't quite articulate." Donald proceeded to share specific incidents that had troubled him over the course of our friendship with Lauren. The dramatic illness she had claimed during her sister's wedding, which had mysteriously resolved the day after the event concluded. The elaborate story about a car accident that had generated an outpouring of sympathy and financial support from our social circle, despite inconsistencies in her account that Donald had noted but never challenged. He described watching Lauren carefully craft narratives designed to position herself as a victim or martyr, always managing to emerge from difficult situations with increased attention and support from friends and family. What I had interpreted as Lauren's unfortunate tendency to encounter more than her share of hardships, Donald had recognized as a pattern of manipulation designed to extract emotional and financial resources from people who cared about her. "I never said anything because I knew how much your friendship meant to you," Donald explained. "But watching her operate today, seeing how she targeted those grieving families with their donations, I couldn't stay silent anymore." My defensive instincts flared as Donald criticized the woman I had considered closer than a sister. Lauren and I had shared everything throughout our childhood and adult lives. She had been my maid of honor, my confidant during difficult times, and my biggest cheerleader during moments of triumph. The suggestion that our entire relationship might be built on manipulation felt like an attack on my own judgment and perception. But as Donald continued describing specific behaviors he had observed, I began recognizing patterns that I had previously dismissed or rationalized away. Lauren's tendency to monopolize conversations by redirecting attention to her own struggles. The way she managed to extract promises of help or support from friends by presenting her situations as more desperate than they actually were. Her skill at making people feel guilty for not providing enough assistance or attention. The most disturbing revelation came when Donald showed me additional research he had conducted about Lauren's charity foundation. New Beginnings specifically targeted families who had experienced pregnancy loss or infant mortality, using their grief as a source of donations and emotional validation. The foundation's website featured heart-wrenching testimonials from families who had lost children, accompanied by carefully worded appeals for financial support. Lauren had positioned herself as someone who understood their pain through her own pregnancy journey, creating a connection based on shared experience that was entirely fabricated. The families who had donated thousands of dollars at the baby shower had done so believing they were supporting someone who genuinely empathized with their losses and would use their contributions to help others navigate similar tragedies. The realization that Lauren had been exploiting the deepest pain of vulnerable families for personal gain added layers of horror to the betrayal that extended far beyond our personal relationship. This was not simply about a friend lying to maintain attention or sympathy. This represented a systematic pattern of emotional manipulation designed to extract money and control from everyone within Lauren's sphere of influence. As Donald and I sat in our kitchen surrounded by the clinical evidence of Lauren's deception, I began to understand that the woman I thought I knew had never actually existed. The Lauren I loved was a carefully constructed persona designed to elicit specific responses from the people around her. Every shared memory, Every moment of apparent vulnerability, every expression of friendship had been calculated to serve her purposes rather than reflect genuine emotion or connection. The weight of this realization settled over me like a heavy blanket, making it difficult to breathe as I contemplated the magnitude of what I had discovered. The sleepless night had left me hollow and determined in equal measure. I stood on Lauren's front porch the next morning, my finger hovering over the doorbell as I rehearsed conversations that could never adequately address the magnitude of what I had discovered. The medical evidence sat folded in my purse like a loaded weapon, and my chest felt heavy with the weight of confronting someone I had trusted more than my own family. Merade answered the door instead of Lauren, and immediately I knew something had shifted in the household overnight. Lauren's younger sister had always greeted me with enthusiastic hugs and genuine warmth, but today she stood in the doorway with her arms crossed defensively, her usual bright smile replaced by nervous tension. Her eyes darted past me toward the street, as though she expected to see other unwelcome visitors arriving behind me. "Michelle," she said, her voice lacking its typical cheerfulness. She's having a difficult morning. Maybe this isn't the best time." The stilted quality of her words felt rehearsed, as though she had prepared this response for exactly this scenario. Merade had never been comfortable with deception, and her obvious discomfort told me that she knew far more about Lauren's situation than an innocent sister should. The possibility that Merade had been complicit in Lauren's elaborate fraud added another layer of betrayal to an already devastating situation. "I need to see her, Merade," I replied, stepping forward with more determination than I felt. "This can't wait." Reluctantly, Merade stepped aside and allowed me to enter the house that had once felt like a second home. Every familiar object now appeared different through the lens of Lauren's deception. The family photographs lining the hallway seemed like staged props in an elaborate performance. The comfortable furniture and carefully chosen decorations felt calculated rather than authentic, as though Lauren had designed her entire living space to project an image of stability and trustworthiness. The silence in the house felt oppressive. Yesterday's celebration had filled these rooms with laughter and joy, but now the space felt hollow and contaminated by the knowledge of what had actually transpired. I could still see the lavender decorations in the living room, the remaining evidence of a party built entirely on lies. Lauren appeared at the top of the staircase, and the transformation in her appearance shocked me more than I had anticipated. The radiant glow that had made her the center of attention at the baby shower had vanished completely, replaced by the pallor of someone whose carefully constructed world was beginning to crumble. Her hair hung limp around her shoulders and dark circles shadowed her eyes, giving her the appearance of someone who had spent the night wrestling with demons. She descended the stairs slowly, one hand trailing along the banister for support, and I noticed that her other hand no longer rested protectively over her stomach. The unconscious gesture that had seemed so natural and maternal yesterday had disappeared entirely, further confirming what the medical evidence had already proven. "I wondered when you would come," Lauren said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Donald figured it out, didn't he?" The admission caught me off guard. I had prepared for denial, for anger, for elaborate explanations that would attempt to rationalize her behavior. Instead, Lauren's immediate acknowledgement of Donald's discovery suggested that she had been anticipating this confrontation since the moment we left the baby shower. We settled into her living room, the same space where she had graciously accepted donations from grieving families less than 24 hours earlier. The irony of the location was not lost on me as I watched Lauren curl into the corner of her sofa, drawing her knees up to her chest in a defensive posture that made her appear smaller and more vulnerable than I had ever seen her. "The miscarriage was real," she began, her voice trembling with what appeared to be genuine emotion. 3 months ago. Nobody knew except Alaric and me. We had been trying for over a year, and when I finally got pregnant I was so excited. I told everyone. I bought maternity clothes. I started planning the nursery. Tears began flowing down her cheeks as she described the loss that had apparently triggered this elaborate deception. Her grief seemed authentic, and for a moment, I felt the familiar protective instinct that had characterized our friendship for decades. Lauren had always been fragile beneath her confident exterior, and loss had always affected her more deeply than most people. "When I lost the baby, I couldn't bear to tell everyone that it was over," she continued. "I couldn't face their pity or their attempts to comfort me, so I just kept pretending. It was supposed to be temporary, just until I could figure out how to handle the grief." The explanation felt carefully crafted, designed to evoke sympathy while minimizing her responsibility for the calculated nature of her deception. Lauren was positioning herself as a victim of circumstances rather than acknowledging the deliberate harm she had caused to others through her fraudulent foundation and manipulative behavior. But the charity, Lauren, I pressed, pulling the medical documents from my purse. The donations from families who lost their own children. How do you explain that? Her expression shifted subtly, and I caught a glimpse of something calculating behind her tears. She reached toward me with trembling hands, attempting to take the papers, but I pulled them back. The gesture revealed that even in this moment of apparent confession, Lauren was still trying to control the situation and manage the evidence of her crimes. You don't understand the kind of pain I was in, she said, her voice taking on a pleading quality that I recognized from countless previous conversations where Lauren had needed something from me. I wasn't thinking clearly. The foundation gave me purpose, made me feel like I could turn my loss into something meaningful. The familiar manipulation tactics emerged even during her confession. Lauren was appealing to our shared history, reminding me of all the times I had supported her through difficult periods, and positioning herself as someone who needed my protection rather than someone who had violated my trust. Her tears and vulnerable body language were designed to evoke the same protective response that had characterized our relationship since childhood. Those families trusted you, I replied, my voice growing stronger as my initial sympathy gave way to moral outrage. They gave you money they could barely afford because they believed you understood their pain. You used their grief to fund your lies. Lauren's response revealed the depth of her self-deception and her inability to accept full responsibility for her actions. She continued to frame her behavior as a response to trauma rather than acknowledging the systematic nature of her manipulation and the calculated way she had researched and targeted vulnerable families for exploitation. As our conversation continued, I began to understand that Lauren viewed our friendship not as a mutual relationship built on trust and affection, but as another resource to be managed and exploited for her benefit. Even now, facing exposure and consequences, she was attempting to use our shared history to secure my silence and complicity in covering up her crimes. The woman sitting across from me bore little resemblance to the friend I thought I had known for over 2 decades. I left Lauren's house that morning feeling more confused than when I had arrived. Her tearful confession had raised more questions than it answered, and the manipulative undertones of our conversation lingered in my mind like a persistent ache. The short drive home felt interminable as I grappled with the realization that even during her moment of supposed honesty, Lauren had continued to position herself as the victim rather than accepting accountability for the harm she had caused. Donald was already at the hospital when I returned, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the weight of what I had learned. I found myself wandering through our house aimlessly, unable to focus on any normal activity while my mind processed the magnitude of Lauren's deception. The familiar comfort of my own home felt insufficient to contain the emotional turmoil that threatened to overwhelm me. The doorbell rang at 9:30 the next morning, interrupting my second sleepless night since the baby shower. I expected to find a neighbor or perhaps a delivery person, but instead discovered 2 police officers standing on my front porch. Detective Sarah Coleman introduced herself and her partner, Detective Mark Rivera, before explaining that they were investigating potential fraud related to the New Beginnings Charity Foundation. "We understand you attended a fundraising event recently where donations were collected for this organization," Detective Coleman stated, consulting her notebook with professional efficiency. "We'd like to ask you some questions about what you observed." The formal nature of their inquiry immediately elevated Lauren's deception from a personal betrayal to a criminal matter. I invited the officers into my living room, my hands trembling slightly as I offered them coffee and tried to process the implications of their presence. The investigation was no longer theoretical or contained within our social circle. It had become an official legal proceeding with potentially serious consequences. Detective Rivera explained that they had received a complaint from the Hendricks family, who had donated $500 at the baby shower after sharing their story of losing their infant daughter to heart complications. Mrs. Hendricks had grown suspicious when she attempted to verify Lauren's pregnancy through mutual acquaintances and discovered inconsistencies in the timeline and details Lauren had provided about her condition. She started asking questions and realized that several details about the pregnancy didn't align with what she knew about Lauren's previous medical history, Detective Coleman continued. When she tried to research the New Beginnings Foundation online, she found irregularities in the financial reporting and contacted our fraud division. The revelation that other people had begun questioning Lauren's story provided both relief and additional complexity to my situation. I was not the only person who had been deceived, but I was also not the only person who would be affected by the investigation's outcome. The scope of Lauren's fraud extended far beyond our personal friendship into criminal territory that could result in serious legal consequences. Detective Rivera asked detailed questions about the baby shower, the donation process, and my knowledge of Lauren's pregnancy claims. I found myself providing factual answers while carefully avoiding any mention of the medical evidence Donald had shown me, uncertain about the legal implications of his access to Lauren's private health information. The conversation felt surreal as I described events that had seemed genuine and heartwarming just days earlier, now understanding them as calculated fraud. As the officers prepared to leave, Detective Coleman handed me her business card and explained that they might need additional testimony as their investigation progressed. The possibility of formal testimony forced me to confront a decision I had been avoiding since discovering Lauren's deception: whether to actively cooperate with the investigation or maintain some form of loyalty to our decades-long friendship. The moral dilemma consumed my thoughts for the remainder of the day. Lauren had betrayed my trust and exploited vulnerable families for personal gain, but she had also been my closest friend for over 20 years. The choice between protecting her from the consequences of her actions and ensuring justice for her victims felt impossibly complex, particularly given the magnitude of what testimony could mean for her future. Donald returned from the hospital that evening to find me sitting at our kitchen table, staring at Detective Coleman's business card. His immediate understanding of my internal conflict provided some comfort, but his perspective on the situation was characteristically clear and uncompromising. "Those families trusted her with their most precious memories and their hard-earned money," he said, settling into the chair across from me. "Staying silent makes you complicit in what she did to them." His words resonated with uncomfortable truth, but they also highlighted the painful reality that choosing to testify would effectively end any possibility of salvaging my relationship with Lauren. The decision would define not only how I responded to her betrayal, but also what kind of person I chose to be when faced with moral complexity. My phone began ringing throughout the evening with calls from mutual friends who had heard rumors about the investigation. Some expressed disbelief about the allegations against Lauren, while others admitted they had harbored suspicions about her behavior for years. The divided reactions within our social circle reflected my own internal struggle between loyalty and justice. The most disturbing call came from Lauren herself, whose voice carried a desperate quality that I had never heard before. She alternated between pleading for my silence and making veiled references to secrets from our shared past that she could reveal if I chose to cooperate with the investigation. The conversation confirmed my growing understanding that Lauren viewed relationships as leverage to be used for control rather than sources of mutual support and affection. By the end of that week, I had received visits from 3 different mutual friends who came to advocate for Lauren's protection. Each conversation followed a similar pattern, with well-meaning people urging me to consider the broader implications of the investigation for our entire social circle. The pressure to maintain silence felt overwhelming, but it also reinforced my realization that many people in our community had been complicit in enabling Lauren's manipulative behavior through years of willful ignorance. The investigation had transformed my private moral dilemma into a public test of character that would have lasting consequences for every relationship in my life. As news of the fraud investigation spread through our community, I found myself at the center of a social earthquake that revealed the true nature of people I had considered close friends for years. The first surprise came from an unexpected source. Merade called me 3 days after the police visit, her voice shaking as she asked to meet in person rather than discuss things over the phone. We agreed to meet at a small coffee shop across town, far from our usual haunts where we might encounter mutual acquaintances who would want to know what we were discussing. When I arrived, Merade was already seated in a corner booth, her hands wrapped tightly around a coffee cup that had clearly gone cold. The confident, cheerful woman I had known for years looked smaller somehow, her shoulders hunched as though carrying an invisible weight. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and she kept glancing toward the entrance as though expecting unwelcome visitors. "I need to tell you something about Lauren," she began without preamble, her voice barely audible above the ambient noise of the coffee shop. something I should have told someone months ago. What Merade revealed over the next hour fundamentally altered my understanding of Lauren's psychological manipulation tactics and the systematic nature of her deception. She had been aware of the fake pregnancy for 3 months, trapped between family loyalty and growing horror at what her sister had become. Lauren had sworn her to secrecy with a combination of emotional blackmail and threats that revealed the depth of her controlling behavior. She told me about the miscarriage and I felt sorry for her, Merade explained, pulling a manila envelope from her purse. But then I found these in her home office when I was helping her organize donation records. The documents Merade showed me were more damaging than anything I could have imagined. Lauren had created detailed profiles of potential donors, complete with research into their personal tragedies, financial situations, and emotional vulnerabilities. The Henderson family's file contained information about their son's death, their insurance situation, and even notes about Mrs. Henderson's tendency to feel guilty about not doing enough to help other grieving parents. She researched these families like they were business prospects, Merade continued, her voice filled with disgust. She crafted personalized approaches based on their specific losses, timing her contact during anniversaries or other emotionally difficult periods. The revelation that Lauren had systematically targeted vulnerable families during their most painful moments transformed my understanding of her actions from desperate deception to calculated predation. This was not a woman who had lost her way due to grief, but someone who had weaponized empathy to exploit the deepest pain of people who trusted her. Merade also revealed that Lauren had threatened to destroy her relationship with their parents if she exposed the fraud. The psychological control Lauren exercised extended beyond financial manipulation to include emotional terrorism against her own family members. Even now, speaking with me represented an enormous risk for Merade, who feared Lauren's retaliation but could no longer remain silent about the harm being caused to innocent families. Detective Coleman arranged for me to meet with several of the donor families whose stories had emerged during the investigation. These conversations provided a human face to Lauren's crimes that made my decision about testimony far more clear and urgent than any abstract moral principle could have accomplished. The Martinez family had donated $800 they could not afford, money earmarked for their own daughter's college fund, because Lauren had contacted them on the anniversary of their son's death. Mrs. Martinez wept as she described how Lauren had seemed to understand their pain so perfectly, sharing details about pregnancy loss that created an instant bond of shared experience. She knew exactly what to say, Mr. Martinez explained, his voice heavy with betrayal. She talked about the guilt, the what-ifs, the way people avoid you afterward because they don't know what to say. We thought we had found someone who really understood. The elderly Mrs. Chin had donated her entire monthly Social Security surplus, convinced that supporting Lauren's foundation would honor the memory of her stillborn daughter. Lauren had approached her at the grocery store apparently by chance, but Marade's documentation revealed that Lauren had researched Mrs. Chen's shopping patterns to orchestrate the accidental encounter. Each family's story revealed how Lauren had reopened emotional wounds and exploited grief for personal gain, using their most vulnerable moments as opportunities for manipulation. The financial fraud was devastating enough, but the psychological damage she had inflicted by betraying their trust during periods of mourning felt far more cruel and lasting. Meanwhile, our social circle was fracturing along lines that revealed uncomfortable truths about relationships I had valued for years. Some mutual friends rallied to Lauren's defense, insisting that the investigation was a misunderstanding and that Lauren's past kindness should earn her the benefit of the doubt. Others expressed outrage at being deceived, admitting they had harbored suspicions about Lauren's behavior but had never felt comfortable voicing their concerns. The most disturbing conversations came from friends who acknowledged they had noticed Lauren's manipulative tendencies but had chosen to ignore them rather than risk social conflict. Margaret from our book club admitted she had always felt uncomfortable with Lauren's tendency to monopolize conversations with her personal dramas. Sarah from the hospital auxiliary confessed she had questioned some of Lauren's fundraising methods but had convinced herself that the charitable purpose justified overlooking her concerns. These admissions forced me to confront how our entire social group had enabled Lauren's behavior through years of willful ignorance and conflict avoidance. The desire to maintain social harmony had created an environment where manipulation could flourish unchecked, with anyone who raised questions being subtly discouraged from pursuing their concerns. Lauren's professional life began collapsing as news of the investigation reached her workplace. The hospital launched its own internal inquiry into her conduct, particularly examining whether she had used her position to identify potential victims for her charity fraud. Colleagues who had previously admired Lauren's dedication to helping families began questioning every interaction they had witnessed, wondering whether her professional persona had been as fabricated as her personal life. The investigation revealed that Lauren had indeed used her access to patient information to identify families who had experienced pregnancy loss, then approached them outside the hospital setting to solicit donations for new beginnings. This breach of professional ethics added workplace misconduct charges to her mounting legal troubles and demonstrated that her manipulation extended into every aspect of her life. As I absorbed the full scope of Lauren's systematic deception and the widespread damage she had caused, my internal conflict about testimony began to resolve itself in favor of justice rather than misplaced loyalty. The weight of evidence from Mairead's documentation, the heartbreaking stories from victim families, and the revelation of Lauren's professional misconduct had transformed my understanding of the situation from a personal betrayal between friends into something far more serious and far-reaching. I called Detective Coleman on a Tuesday morning, my voice steady despite the magnitude of what I was about to commit to. "I'd like to schedule a formal interview," I said. "I have information that will be helpful to your investigation." The decision felt both inevitable and terrifying. 23 years of friendship was about to end with my testimony in a criminal investigation, but the alternative, remaining silent while Lauren continued to exploit vulnerable families, had become morally unacceptable. The choice between protecting her from consequences and protecting future victims had clarified itself through the accumulation of evidence that demonstrated the calculated nature of her crimes. The formal interview took place at the district attorney's office 3 days later. Detective Coleman and a prosecutor named James Morrison spent 4 hours walking me through every detail of my knowledge about Lauren's deceptive behavior patterns, the timeline of her fake pregnancy claims, and the charity fraud operation I had unknowingly witnessed at the baby shower. The process was emotionally exhausting but strangely liberating. 4 months, I had carried the burden of Lauren's secrets and manipulation, feeling responsible for protecting someone who had never deserved my loyalty. Speaking the truth to investigators felt like releasing a weight I had not realized I was carrying, transforming me from an unwitting accomplice into an advocate for Lauren's victims. Morrison asked detailed questions about Lauren's psychological manipulation tactics, wanting to understand how she had gained the trust and sympathy necessary to execute her fraud successfully. I described her skill at identifying emotional vulnerabilities in potential donors, her ability to craft personalized approaches that reopened grief wounds for her benefit, and her systematic research into families who had experienced pregnancy loss or infant mortality. The prosecutor was particularly interested in the baby shower itself, which he described as a criminal enterprise disguised as a social gathering. I provided photographs from the event, copies of correspondence about donations, and detailed accounts of how Lauren had orchestrated the afternoon to maximize sympathy and financial contributions from attendees who believed they were supporting a genuine charitable cause. As I recounted the events and behaviors I had witnessed over the years, the systematic nature of Lauren's deception became even more apparent. This was not a desperate woman who had lost her way due to grief, but someone who had deliberately constructed an elaborate criminal scheme designed to exploit the most vulnerable emotions of people who trusted her. The evidence-gathering process confirmed that Lauren's actions represented a deliberate criminal enterprise rather than a momentary lapse in judgment. Donald accompanied me to the interview, providing moral support and helping me process the complex emotions that arose from formally breaking loyalty to someone who had been central to my life for decades. His medical perspective proved valuable in explaining Lauren's behavior patterns to investigators, particularly her skill at identifying and exploiting psychological vulnerabilities in her victims. The days following my formal testimony brought a mixture of relief and apprehension as I prepared for the social and emotional fallout that would inevitably result from my cooperation with the investigation. I knew that some mutual friends would view me as a traitor who had destroyed Lauren's life, while others would finally understand the scope of her deception and support my decision to prioritize justice over friendship. I began working with a therapist recommended by Donald to process the complex grief surrounding the loss of a friendship that had been central to my identity for most of my adult life. Dr. Sarah Chin helped me understand the difference between mourning the genuine relationship I thought I had shared with Lauren and feeling misplaced guilt about the consequences of her own criminal actions. "You're grieving the death of someone who never actually existed," Dr. Chin explained during one of our sessions. "The Lauren you loved was a carefully constructed persona designed to manipulate your emotions and extract value from your relationship. The real Lauren, the one who systematically exploited grieving families for personal gain, is someone you never truly knew." The therapeutic process helped me separate my legitimate sadness about losing what I had believed was a meaningful friendship from any responsibility for Lauren's legal troubles. Her consequences stemmed directly from her own choices and actions, not from my decision to tell the truth about what I had witnessed and experienced. Donald proved instrumental in helping me maintain perspective during this difficult period. His unwavering support reinforced my understanding that protecting future victims was more important than preserving past loyalties, particularly when those loyalties had been based on deception rather than authentic connection. I also began preparing for what I knew would be Lauren's inevitable attempts to manipulate me before and during any legal proceedings. Based on her behavior patterns over the years, I expected her to deploy every emotional manipulation technique in her arsenal, from guilt trips about our shared history to accusations that I was betraying someone who had always supported me. Working with Dr. Chin, I developed strategies to resist these anticipated manipulation attempts and maintain my commitment to truth and justice regardless of how Lauren might try to undermine my resolve. We practiced responses to the guilt-inducing scenarios I expected Lauren to create, helping me understand that her likely portrayal of herself as the victim and me as the betrayer represented just another form of the psychological manipulation that had characterized our relationship for years. The preparation process reinforced my growing understanding of how Lauren's manipulation tactics had controlled our friendship, often making me feel responsible for her emotional well-being and protective of her reputation even when her behavior had been problematic. Breaking free from these ingrained response patterns required conscious effort and professional guidance, but it was essential for maintaining my commitment to supporting the investigation regardless of the personal cost. As the legal process moved forward, I found myself experiencing a sense of empowerment that I had not anticipated. For the first time in years, I was acting according to my own moral principles rather than managing Lauren's emotional needs or protecting her from accountability. The decision to provide testimony had transformed me from a victim of Lauren's manipulation into an active participant in seeking justice for all the people she had harmed. The months that followed brought a series of legal proceedings that would expose the full scope of her deception to public scrutiny and deliver consequences that exceeded anything I could have anticipated when I first walked into that district attorney's office. My testimony became a cornerstone of the prosecution's case against Lauren. The insider perspective I provided helped investigators understand the sophisticated psychological manipulation tactics she had employed to gain trust and exploit vulnerabilities in her victims. During my time on the witness stand, I detailed the years of behavior patterns I had observed, the calculated nature of her charity fraud operation, and the systematic way she had researched and targeted grieving families for exploitation. The courtroom atmosphere felt surreal as I recounted intimate details of a friendship that had spanned over 2 decades. Lauren sat at the defense table, occasionally glancing in my direction with expressions that alternated between pleading and accusatory. Her appearance had deteriorated significantly since the baby shower, with her previously immaculate presentation replaced by the hollow look of someone whose carefully constructed world was crumbling around her. The prosecution presented evidence that painted a comprehensive picture of Lauren's criminal enterprise. Bank records showed suspicious patterns of deposits coinciding with her charity fundraising events. Email communications revealed her systematic research into potential donors' personal tragedies and financial situations. Medical records confirmed the fabricated nature of her pregnancy claims and documented her misuse of professional access to patient information for identifying potential victims. Each piece of evidence felt like another nail in the coffin of the person I had believed Lauren to be. The woman I had loved and trusted for most of my adult life was revealed as someone who had weaponized empathy and exploited grief with the calculated precision of a career criminal. The testimony process forced me to confront the painful reality that virtually every aspect of our friendship had been contaminated by her manipulation and deception. Lauren's defense attorney attempted to portray her as a mentally ill woman whose actions stemmed from the psychological trauma of her miscarriage. They painted a picture of someone who had lost touch with reality due to overwhelming grief, positioning her fraud as the desperate actions of someone who needed psychiatric treatment rather than criminal punishment. The strategy might have been more effective if not for the overwhelming evidence of premeditation and systematic planning that characterized her crimes. The legal proceedings destroyed every aspect of Lauren's carefully constructed life with devastating efficiency. Her marriage dissolved within weeks of the charges being filed, as Alaric faced his own legal scrutiny for potential complicity in the fraud. The investigation revealed that he had been aware of the fake pregnancy for months and had actively participated in maintaining the deception during social interactions with friends and family. Lauren's professional reputation disintegrated as the hospital terminated her employment and launched their own investigation into her misconduct. The medical board initiated proceedings to revoke her professional licenses, ensuring that she would never again have access to patient information that could be exploited for personal gain. Colleagues who had previously respected her dedication to helping families began questioning every interaction they had witnessed, wondering whether her entire professional persona had been as fabricated as her personal life. The New Beginnings Charity Foundation was dissolved by court order, with all remaining assets frozen pending restitution to defrauded donors. The investigation uncovered financial irregularities dating back to the foundation's inception, revealing that Lauren had been systematically diverting donations for personal expenses while maintaining only minimal charitable activities to preserve the appearance of legitimate operations. Civil lawsuits filed by victim families added another layer of legal consequences to Lauren's criminal charges. The Martinez family, Mrs. Chin, the Hendersons, and dozens of other donors sought recovery of their contributions along with damages for the emotional harm caused by Lauren's exploitation of their grief. The combined financial obligations from these lawsuits guaranteed that Lauren would face devastating economic consequences even if she managed to avoid significant prison time. The scandal's impact extended throughout our entire social community, forcing friends and acquaintances to confront their own role in enabling Lauren's behavior through years of willful blindness to her manipulative tendencies. The revelation that someone they had admired and trusted had been systematically exploiting vulnerable families created a crisis of confidence that affected every social interaction and relationship within our circle. Several mutual friends approached me during the legal proceedings to apologize for their initial skepticism about the fraud allegations or their attempts to pressure me into protecting Lauren from investigation. Margaret from the book club admitted that she had dismissed her own uncomfortable feelings about Lauren's behavior because challenging her would have disrupted the social harmony of our group. Sarah from the hospital auxiliary confessed that she had ignored red flags about Lauren's fundraising methods because she wanted to believe in the charitable work being accomplished. These apologies provided some measure of validation for the difficult decision I had made to cooperate with the investigation, but they also highlighted how isolated I would have been if I had attempted to expose Lauren's behavior without the support of legal authorities. The community's willingness to enable manipulation rather than confront uncomfortable truths had created an environment where Lauren's crimes could flourish unchecked for years. The legal resolution brought a form of closure that felt both satisfying and hollow. Lauren was sentenced to 3 years in prison followed by 5 years of probation, with restitution orders requiring her to repay over $40,000 in fraudulent donations. The court mandate that she undergo psychological evaluation and treatment acknowledged the mental health components of her behavior while maintaining accountability for her criminal actions. Watching the donations being returned to the families Lauren had defrauded provided some measure of justice for victims who had trusted her with their most vulnerable emotions and financial resources. The Martinez family used their recovered funds to restore their daughter's college savings. Mrs. Chin received back the money she could not afford to lose from her limited Social Security income. Each restitution check represented validation that these families had been wronged and deserved compensation for the harm they had suffered. The legal proceedings provided official confirmation that my decision to testify had been morally correct and necessary to protect future victims from Lauren's manipulation. The judge specifically referenced my testimony during sentencing, noting that my courage in coming forward had prevented additional families from being victimized by Lauren's fraudulent charity operations. However, the process also forced me to accept the painful truth that the friendship I was mourning had been based on deception rather than authentic connection. The person I thought I had known and loved for over 20 years had never truly existed, existing only as a carefully constructed persona designed to extract value from relationships rather than build genuine human bonds based on mutual trust and affection. This painful truth settled into my consciousness like sediment in still water, fundamentally altering my understanding of friendship, trust, and my own judgment about the people closest to me. 6 months after Lauren's sentencing, a letter arrived at my home with the return address of a psychiatric facility 2 states away. The familiar handwriting on the envelope sent an immediate wave of anxiety through my chest, but I knew I needed to read whatever final message Lauren had chosen to send. Donald found me sitting at the kitchen table that evening, the letter spread before me, my hands trembling as I processed the contents. The letter contained exactly what I should have expected from someone whose psychological makeup I was finally beginning to understand. Lauren offered what appeared to be an apology, but the words were carefully constructed to deflect responsibility and assign blame for her downfall to everyone except herself. She acknowledged the pain she had caused but framed it as the inevitable result of her mental health struggles rather than deliberate choices she had made to exploit vulnerable people. "I never meant for things to go this far, Michelle," she had written in her distinctive script. "The grief from losing the baby made me lose touch with reality. I know you think I'm a monster now, but you were supposed to be my friend. Friends protect each other, and when I needed you most, you chose strangers over our history." The manipulation continued even from her confinement, with Lauren positioning herself as the victim of circumstances beyond her control while portraying me as the betrayer who had destroyed her life through my testimony. She made no mention of the families she had defrauded or the systematic nature of her crimes, instead focusing entirely on how my cooperation with investigators had ruined everything she had built. Reading the letter confirmed what I had begun to suspect during the legal proceedings. Lauren's psychological issues ran deeper than I had ever understood, and genuine remorse or meaningful change might be impossible for someone so fundamentally committed to manipulation and control. Even facing the consequences of her actions, she remained unable to accept full responsibility or acknowledge the harm she had caused to others. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a file with other documents from the investigation, then walked to the fireplace and burned it. The physical act of destruction felt symbolic of my final separation from Lauren's attempts to control my emotions and actions. Her words no longer carried the power to make me feel guilty or responsible for her choices. The months following the legal resolution brought a period of profound personal reflection as I worked to understand how someone I had trusted so completely could have deceived me for so many years. The process of confronting this reality proved emotionally devastating but ultimately liberating as I stopped carrying guilt for Lauren's choices and began to rebuild my understanding of authentic relationships. Dr. Chin continued to help me navigate the complex grief surrounding the loss of what I had believed was a genuine friendship. The therapeutic process revealed that I was mourning not just the end of our relationship, but the discovery that many of my most cherished memories and experiences had been based on Lauren's calculated manipulation rather than authentic emotional connection. "You're grieving multiple losses simultaneously," Dr. Chin explained during one particularly difficult session. "The friendship you thought you had, the person you believed Lauren to be, and your previous understanding of your own judgment about relationships. It's natural that this process feels overwhelming. The experience fundamentally changed my approach to forming and maintaining relationships. I developed stronger personal boundaries and became more attuned to manipulation tactics that I had previously overlooked or excused in the name of being supportive. The painful education I had received through Lauren's betrayal served as protection against future exploitation by people who viewed relationships as tools for control rather than sources of mutual support and genuine connection. I began forming new friendships based on authentic connection and shared values rather than convenience or shared history. These relationships developed more slowly than my friendship with Lauren had, but they felt more solid and trustworthy because they were built on honest communication and mutual respect rather than one person's need to extract value from the other. The experience taught me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's destructive behavior, even when that person was once important to you. My decision to testify against Lauren had felt like a betrayal of our friendship at the time, but I came to understand that protecting her from consequences would have been a greater betrayal of the victims she had harmed and might harm in the future. Finding meaning in the painful experience became essential to my healing process. I began volunteering with victim support organizations that helped people who had been targeted by charity fraud or emotional manipulation. My story resonated with others who had experienced similar betrayals, and sharing my experience provided them with validation and practical strategies for recovery. The victim support work connected me with people who understood the unique trauma of being manipulated by someone they had trusted completely. We formed a community of survivors who supported each other through the complex emotions surrounding betrayal by people we had loved. The shared experience created bonds that felt more authentic and meaningful than many of the relationships I had maintained before learning to recognize manipulation tactics. Working with other fraud victims also provided perspective on the broader impact of Lauren's crimes. I met elderly people who had lost life savings to charity scams, parents who had been targeted during their children's medical crises, and families who had been exploited during periods of grief and vulnerability. Each story reinforced my understanding that my decision to cooperate with the investigation had been necessary to protect others from similar harm. The transformation from victim to advocate provided me with a sense of purpose that helped me process the complex emotions surrounding my decision to expose Lauren's crimes. Rather than simply moving past the experience, I found ways to use what I had learned to protect other vulnerable people from manipulation and fraud. Donald often remarked on the positive changes he observed in my character and relationships following the resolution of Lauren's case. The experience had made me more discerning about the people I allowed into my inner circle, but also more compassionate toward others who had experienced betrayal or manipulation in their own lives. The painful journey had ultimately led to personal growth that I could not have achieved through easier circumstances. I learned to trust my instincts about people's character, to value authenticity over charm, and to prioritize protecting vulnerable people over maintaining comfortable social relationships that enabled harmful behavior. The legacy of Lauren's betrayal became not just a cautionary tale about the dangers of manipulation, but a source of strength and wisdom that I could share with others who needed protection from similar exploitation. If this story of betrayal and justice kept you captivated until the very end, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Michelle finally decided to testify, choosing truth over misplaced loyalty. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more gripping stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.